Some of the worst people alive are the ones giving the loudest advice. And even worse, we're listening to them. We celebrate narcissists like they're visionaries. We worship burnout like it's a badge of honor. We confuse arrogance for leadership and emotional numbness for strength. Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Andrew Tate, they're not just making headlines, they're shaping mindsets. And the internet is echoing their mantras like gospel. Only losers are humble. Sleep is for the weak. Depression isn't real. Follow your passion, no matter the cost. But if everyone followed this kind of advice, what would the world look like? The Stoics had a word for this, madness. And Epictetus gave us the antidote. The ability to test advice the way a money changer tests coins. By weight, by sound, by truth. In this video, we're going to tear down some of the most dangerous and seductive advice floating around the internet. We'll look at what the Stoics would say about ego, hustle culture, toxic positivity, and more. And yes, we're naming names, because behind every viral quote is a deeper cost you're not being told about. So stay with me. The fourth insight might just save you from chasing a version of success that will destroy you. Show me someone without an ego, and I'll show you a loser. It's the kind of quote that gets likes, shares, applause. It flatters the part of us that wants to feel important. But here's the truth the internet won't tell you. Ego is not a strength. Ego is a liability. Epictetus said, "It is impossible to learn that which you think you already know." The Stoics despised arrogance, not because it was morally wrong, but because it made you stupid. Ego closes the door to growth, to reality, to connection. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man on earth, spent his mornings reminding himself not to be seduced by power. He called it the stain of imperialization. He wrote about trying not to be dyed purple, the color of the emperor's cloak, because he knew what that color did to a man's soul. And yet today, we idolize ego like it's the secret to winning. Donald Trump is perhaps the most glaring example of this illusion. The man has built a brand on bravado and bluster, bankruptcies, scandals, 2 impeachments, and a trail of broken relationships. And still, the myth persists that ego got him to the top. But let's be clear, ego didn't help him succeed. It made every step of the journey harder. His ego didn't make him a great leader. It made him blind to his flaws, deaf to feedback, and utterly incapable of honest reflection. Contrast that with George Marshall, the architect of the Marshall Plan. His wife once said, he had an ego, but he worked hard to contain it. And President Truman said, never did Marshall think about himself. That's strength. That's discipline. That's Stoicism in action. So ask yourself, do you want a legacy built on attention or respect? Do you want to look powerful or be effective? Because ego will scream for validation. But humility, real humility, will open doors ego never could. And that's just the beginning. Because if ego is the silent poison, then hustle culture is its reckless enabler. And in the next section, we're diving into a lie that's burning people out and breaking them down. One all-nighter at a time. Work like hell. Put in 80 to 100 hours a week. It sounds like discipline. It feels like ambition. But too often, it's just self-destruction disguised as success. We've romanticized burnout. We post about our sleepless nights like they're war stories. But here's a truth no one wants to admit. Hustle culture doesn't reward you, it devours you. Ariana Huffington once woke up in a pool of her own blood. She had collapsed from exhaustion, hit her head, and lost teeth. That moment wasn't heroic. It was terrifying. And it was a wake-up call. She realized, success that costs you your health is not success. The Stoics understood this long before we had burnout studies and brain scans. Seneca warned, the mind that is not allowed to rest will break, just as the anvil breaks the hammer. Marcus Aurelius lived by festina lente, make haste slowly. He worked hard, yes, but never at the cost of clarity, health, or reason. And yet, today we glorify men like Elon Musk, whose lifestyle is less about mastery and more about mayhem. He brags about 100-hour work weeks, yet admits to needing sleeping pills to shut down his mind. His board worries about his health. His judgment falters. His tweets spiral at 3 a.m. Is that brilliance or burnout? Because what no one tells you is this: sleep deprivation mimics intoxication. At 100 hours a week, your brain is operating like it's drunk. You might look like a hero from the outside, but you're barely functional on the inside. And that's not Stoicism. That's ego in disguise. That's noise. The Stoics aimed for sustainability, not spectacle. They believed in working well, not endlessly. They believed in rhythm, not recklessness. So if you're running on fumes and calling it drive, stop. Rest is not weakness. It's wisdom. Conservation of energy is not quitting. It's preparing. Because the real goal isn't to go hard. It's to go far. And speaking of far, some people believe emotions should be left behind if you want to go anywhere meaningful. But what happens when the cost of repression is your humanity? Let's talk about the lie that Stoicism is about emotionlessness, and how that distortion is hurting real people in real pain right now. Clinical depression isn't real. That's not just bad advice. That's cruelty pretending to be courage. And sadly, this kind of toxic thinking now hides behind the mask of Stoicism. But let's be clear, Stoicism is not about suppressing emotion. It's about understanding it, managing it, channeling it. It's not about pretending you don't feel pain. It's about learning how to endure it and help others do the same. Andrew Tate, currently on trial for crimes against women, likes to preach that feeling weak is fake. That vulnerability is for losers. But this isn't strength. It's cowardice dressed in bravado. And more dangerously, it's a total distortion of what Stoic philosophy actually stands for. You think Marcus Aurelius didn't suffer? The man buried children, fought plagues, led wars, struggled to get out of bed in the morning, so much so that he wrote an entire passage debating whether to rise or stay warm under the blankets. Does that sound like someone who believed pain wasn't real? No, he felt everything, but he still chose to show up. Stoicism isn't about becoming a machine. It's about being a human and doing the right thing anyway. Seneca himself struggled with illness. Epictetus lived with a broken body. Lincoln, who read the Stoics, fought lifelong depression so severe his friends once had to remove sharp objects from his room. But here's what separates them from men like Andrew Tate. They never used their pain as an excuse to belittle others. They let suffering soften them, not harden them. And if you've never experienced depression, good. Be grateful. But don't confuse ignorance with insight. That's why we read. That's why we listen. To understand what we haven't lived. Susan Cain, in her beautiful book Bittersweet, wrote about the quiet power of melancholy, that some souls are tuned to the frequency of pain, not because they're broken, but because they're built differently. And in that depth, there's room for greatness. The Stoics were never in the toughen up business. They were in the be of service business. And how can you serve anyone? How can you lead, create, inspire if you refuse to feel? So if you're struggling, that doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. And if you're someone who hasn't struggled, that gives you a responsibility to listen better, judge less, and be kinder to others and to yourself. Because the true Stoic isn't the one who never bends. It's the one who bends and doesn't break. But sometimes the very people preaching toughness are the ones breaking in silence. And in the next section, we'll explore how weaponized confidence becomes a smokescreen for arrogance, and how offensive truth-telling often masks something far more dangerous. In order to think, you have to risk being offensive. Maybe, but far too often, the offense isn't the cost of truth. It's the excuse for cruelty. Some people punch down and call it courage. They mock, belittle, and provoke. And when others flinch, they say, "See, you're too soft." But the Stoics? They believed the truth didn't need to be shouted to be heard. They believed in the power of precision, not provocation. Epictetus said, "It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about those things." So yes, Stoics train themselves not to be easily offended. But that doesn't mean they train themselves to be offensive. There's a difference. Jordan Peterson built a platform by saying what others won't. But too often, what he says isn't about clarity, it's about domination. When he repeatedly misgenders someone, not to make a point but to make a scene, it's not philosophy, it's theater. And the Stoics weren't performers. They were practitioners. There was once a man in the UK who was fired for being a rude, unhygienic jerk at work. He sued the company claiming discrimination, saying he was a Stoic. But that's not Stoicism. That's just bad manners hiding behind bad philosophy. Marcus Aurelius didn't say, "Be a pain in everyone's ass." He said, "Be tolerant with others. Be strict with yourself." And sometimes the cleverest thing isn't being right. It's being kind. Jeff Bezos once calculated the exact number of years his grandmother had lost from smoking. He told her proudly. She burst into tears. His grandfather pulled him aside and said, "You'll learn, Jeff, it's easier to be clever than it is to be kind." Stoicism isn't about emotional detachment. It's about emotional responsibility. Yes, we must think critically. Yes, we must speak the truth. But truth without empathy is just ego in disguise. So next time you feel the urge to tell it like it is, ask yourself, is this about helping or humiliating? Because the people I admire, Marcus, Epictetus, Seneca, they weren't in the business of making people cry. They were in the business of helping people see. And that requires not just intellect, but heart. Now let's turn to another rising trend, a new shortcut to enlightenment that's sweeping wellness circles, hailed as transformation, but potentially trafficking in illusion. Let's talk about psychedelics and the danger of unearned wisdom. We live in the age of shortcuts. One pill to fix your pain, one retreat to change your life, and now one psychedelic trip to unlock enlightenment. But here's a question no one's asking loudly enough. If psychedelics change everything, why do their evangelists keep going back for more? Look, I'm not against science. I'm not against healing. If you're dealing with treatment-resistant PTSD or crippling depression, and nothing else has worked, then yes, explore. Cautiously, my friend Tim Ferriss is funding serious, careful research into these areas. But that's not what most of this movement is. What we're seeing now is a wellness trend hijacked by influencers who don't understand the depths of what they're playing with. And worse, they don't seem to care. No medical background, no philosophical grounding, no reverence, just hashtags, sound baths, and promises of instant clarity. But clarity isn't instant. Marcus Aurelius didn't get to meditations through mushrooms. He got there through decades of daily struggle, loss, leadership, pain, reflection. Joan Didion, sitting at this very table I'm speaking from, wrote essays on the psychedelic scene of the 60s. She didn't see visionaries. She saw clowns in costume, claiming wisdom they hadn't earned. And that's what worries me most. Unearned wisdom. Because real transformation, it doesn't happen on demand. It doesn't happen on a weekend. It's slow, humbling, repetitive. It looks less like fireworks and more like someone waking up early to do the hard thing, again and again and again. If Stoicism teaches us anything, it's that the mind is trained, not triggered. There are no fast tracks to virtue. There are no downloads for character. So if someone's trying to sell you a shortcut to enlightenment, ask, are they guiding you or marketing to you? Because sometimes the deepest truths are the ones we arrive at slowly, through failure, through service, through work. And if your so-called awakening requires a chemical, a retreat, or a guru who charges $10,000 a seat, it may not be enlightenment you're buying. It may just be ego, dressed up in spiritual robes. And speaking of ego, let's talk about one of the most celebrated lies of modern advice. Follow your passion. Sounds inspiring, but is it wise? Let's find out. Follow your passion. It's the advice we give to every lost teenager. It's the comfort we offer to anyone stuck in a job they hate. And it's almost always well-intentioned. But that doesn't make it wise. The Stoics would have warned us, passion left unchecked is dangerous. Not because caring deeply is wrong, but because when passion becomes obsession, we go blind. Blind to risk, blind to consequence, blind to reality. In Ego is the Enemy, I wrote about Christopher McCandless, whose passion for the wild led him into the Alaskan wilderness, unprepared, unequipped, and ultimately to his death. Passion didn't save him. It consumed him. History is filled with passionate disasters. Napoleon, Alexander, certain US presidents, people who were so sure, so consumed, so inflamed, that they couldn't see the wreckage they were causing until it was too late. Goethe put it best, great passions are maladies without hope. Even Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, when asked to describe his legendary coach John Wooden in one word, said, dispassionate. Because great coaches don't fuel fire, they contain it. They don't say, let your emotions run wild. They say, let's direct that energy where it matters. I'm not saying you shouldn't care about your work. You should care deeply. But don't mistake excitement for calling. Don't confuse butterflies with a blueprint. The Stoic question is never, what do I love? It's, what's mine to do? What's within my control? What serves the greater good? You want a fulfilling life? Don't just chase passion. Find the intersection of what you're good at, what the world needs, and what energizes you. And then commit to the process, not the feeling. Because passion fades, but discipline endures. And while the world is full of passionate talkers, it's built by dispassionate doers. So next time you hear follow your passion, ask instead, what problem can I solve? What weight am I strong enough to carry? Because that's where meaning lives. Not in what lights you up, but in what you're willing to hold on to when the fire goes out. And if we want to hold on for the long haul, there's one more piece of advice we need to rethink. A small habit that shapes every day we live, the morning routine. Let's talk about how the first hour of your day might be the most important thing you're ignoring. You don't need a morning routine. That's the latest counter trend making its rounds online. A rebellion against structure. A call to just go with the flow. But here's the thing. Flow only works if you've earned the current. And for most people, winging the morning means crashing the day. The Stoics understood this long before we had productivity books or YouTube gurus. Marcus Aurelius opened Book 5 of Meditations with a debate with his own laziness. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. Even the Emperor of Rome had to remind himself not to hide under the blankets. Why? Because how you begin your day determines everything else. Twyla Tharp, one of the greatest choreographers alive, once said, the day is won not in the studio, but when I get in the cab at 5:30 a.m. That first decision sets the tone. That first victory opens the door to all others. Without a routine, your morning becomes a battlefield of distractions. Hit snooze, check your phone, scroll, delay. You start the day reacting instead of leading. But with a routine, even a simple one, you create a rhythm. You begin with intention. You build momentum. You claim agency over your time before the world tries to steal it. And no, it doesn't have to be perfect. You don't need to wake up at 4:30 a.m., chug salt water, or journal by candlelight. You just need something you can own. For me, Wake up. No snooze. Time with my kids. Get them to school. Sit down. Write. And by 10 a.m., I've already won the day. Because every habit is a vote. Every morning is a message to your future self. This is who I am. This is what I do. And the best part, you don't have to do it all day. You just have to do it first. So don't wing it. Don't wait to feel inspired. Discipline isn't about motivation. It's about movement. And when you in the morning, you don't just change your schedule. You change your story. Now let's bring it all together. Because from ego to hustle culture, from toxic advice to misunderstood stoicism, what's the real lesson underneath it all? Let's wrap it up. What if everything you've been told about success is wrong? What if the people we admire most are secretly crumbling? And what if the internet, the place we go for answers, is quietly poisoning how we think, feel, and live? We've just scratched the surface. Ego disguised as strength. Burnout celebrated as hustle. Emotionlessness misbranded as stoicism. Passion mistaken for purpose. And that's just part one. The Stoics would tell us, truth is never loud, but it's always available, if you're brave enough to look. That's what this journey is about. Not feel-good fluff, not trendy hacks, but clarity in the chaos. So here's your invitation. If you've ever felt like the world is spinning too fast, if you've ever sensed that the advice out there is making you anxious, not better, if you're tired of gurus, grind culture, and gurus preaching from podiums built on sand, come with me, because in part 2, we're pulling back the curtain even further. We'll talk about productivity myths, self-help scams, the illusion of control, and the ancient antidotes that still work. You won't want to miss it. Not if you're serious about building a life that lasts. Not if you're ready to stop performing and start living. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and meet me in part 2. Let's keep digging. The truth isn't hiding. It's just waiting for you to stop following and start thinking.